And with me today, I have Jason Whitrock. He is a personal trainer, as well as a EAS Myoplex athlete and a bodybuilding.com spokesmodel. And then I also have Dr. Steve Hertzler, who is the Chief Science Officer for EAS Sport Nutrition, as well as a member of the EAS Academy Advisory Panel. Thank you both for being here. We are thrilled to have you. And today's topic is basically going to cover all different aspects of the ketogenic diet, including what is the ketogenic diet, who uses it or who might benefit from it, and then how to incorporate it into your everyday lifestyle. So I would say before we even get started diving into this, Dr. Hertzler, if you want to talk a little bit about what is the ketogenic diet, and if you were to explain it to one of your patients that came in to talk to you, how would you explain it to them?
Yeah, essentially the ketogenic diet is a very high-fat diet that is moderate in protein and very low in carbohydrate. And the diet has been used therapeutically in different populations, in the epilepsy population, in children. That's one of the areas where it got a large amount of exposure, but it's sort of moved into the fitness and bodybuilding world now. And a lot of individuals are attempting to reduce their carbohydrate and increase their fat intake via this diet. Typically, this diet is around 75% of its calories from fat, 20% of its calories from protein, and about 5% of its calories from carbohydrate.
I think the reason it's becoming more popular is because people are starting to realize that carbohydrates might be the culprit for why people get fat. And insulin resistance is a very real thing, so it kind of turned people's attention to having a high-fat diet.
And the purpose to switch onto this diet or to consume such high-fat, low-carb would be?
Yeah, essentially what you're trying to do is stop your body from burning carbohydrate as its main fuel source and switch the body's metabolism over to metabolizing fat as its primary energy source. When you're metabolizing fat, primarily in the absence of carbohydrates, your body will generate compounds called ketones that circulate in the blood, and then they can be used as energy sources for the brain and for the muscle tissue. And it's not quite as high in protein than some of the typical low-carb diets out there. We have to keep the protein under control because too much protein can actually interfere with the productions of those ketones as well.
And you mentioned ketones. So for the newbie out there, what are ketones and why are they important in this diet or in this type of lifestyle?
Yeah. Ketones, when your body kicks over into heavy-duty fat metabolism, when you're not metabolizing carbohydrate, you're using fat for energy. And when you really start using fat for energy, you actually produce in your body three substances: acetone, acetoacetate, and beta-hydroxybutyrate. And those three substances are called the ketone bodies. And when those circulate in the body, those can be a source of energy for your brain and other tissues to use for fuel. And you start to use those for fuel instead of carbohydrate during your exercise.
Mm-hmm. And Jason, you had briefly mentioned insulin resistance, and
Correct.
I think we can kind of tie into ketones and your body using that for fuel versus what we typically consider carbs or glucose.
So when you're running on glucose, you eat a carbohydrate-rich meal. Now, protein also does convert into glucose, so that is why it's a moderate protein diet. But when you eat carbohydrates, they cause a significant impact on your blood sugar levels. As a response, your body secretes a hormone called insulin. So insulin is this hormone that is responsible for taking glucose and storing it inside muscle cells or fat cells. It's literally called the fat storage hormone. So the other thing that insulin does is, since it's trying to get glucose inside the fat cell, it prevents fat from leaving the fat cell. So since the ketogenic diet is very, very low carb, you are able to control low insulin levels, which allows fat to actually leave the cells. And like the doctor said, as soon as fat leaves the cell, it goes to your liver, gets metabolized there, and turns it into ketones. So that's the most important thing about the carbohydrate restriction, is simply controlling the insulin and blood sugar levels to allow yourself to burn fat. You know, your body wants to burn fat, but it can't because you're constantly spiking your blood sugar and constantly spiking insulin. And where insulin resistance comes into play is over time, when you continuously spike your blood sugar and your insulin levels by eating carb after carb after carb, eventually your body becomes more resistant to that insulin. So the fat cell starts to say, hey, we can't take any more glucose. You know, this is enough, we can't do it. So it resists the effect of insulin. As a response, your body says, well, we got to get this glucose out. So it shuttles out even more insulin. So now, even if you just eat a small amount of carbohydrates, your body's forced to secrete a ton of insulin. And like I said, if insulin is in your bloodstream, it has a locking mechanism on the fat cell, and you simply will not burn fat. So insulin resistance leads to diabetes, where eventually the time is run out, your pancreas just gives up, and now you have type 2 diabetes. So the ketogenic diet kind of reverses that entire mechanism and says, well, let's not run on carbohydrates, then let's run on fats, because fats do not cause a significant increase in blood sugar and insulin levels. And
Yeah, and you bring up a great point, and we will definitely talk about the ketogenic diet for athletes or those who are resistance trained, but
Correct.
its application is not just for one population. Type 2 diabetics is just what you just mentioned. You also mentioned seizures, so maybe talk a little bit about who else could maybe benefit. It may not always be used as a weight loss. It may not always be used, again, for an athletic population.
Yeah, so they're doing a lot of research. You know, this ketogenic diet is coming to the forefront, and thank heavens for it, because they're starting to use the diet actually in cancer research, because cancer survives on glucose. So I expect a lot of promising things to come out of it for that. Parkinson's disease, it's being used in clinical studies right now to see what the effects are on that. Something that's hits home for me. My grandmother suffered from Alzheimer's disease, and so they have actually used an application of a ketogenic diet to see if it's able to kind of help explain, you know, why people get Alzheimer's in the first place, and can this diet cure it? You know, I went low carb forever. I found out, well, I first started off as a wrestler, and I started counting calories, and I said, well, all you have to do to lose weight is undereat and over-exercise. So I did that forever. I got exhausted from it. When I got in the fitness industry, you know, I started doing the same approach, and it just didn't work. I went to find more answers. I did a lot of research on bodybuilding.com, as a matter of fact, and found out that insulin is what drives fat accumulation. So I went low carb forever. And it was absolutely, it was miserable. I had low energy, all this stuff. Then I took a different approach. I started carb cycling. Then I had the opportunity to work with children who suffer from mental illness. And I was brought in as a lead personal trainer. And these kids all suffered from bipolar, schizophrenia, cutters. Many of them had tried to commit suicide. You name it, these kids have it, right? And so I went in there. And the thing about it is, all of these kids were taking a medication, right? And this medication made their triglycerides go up, their risk for cardiovascular disease went up, their weight went up, it skyrocketed. I mean, it went up 30, 40 pounds in a matter of a week. So I was brought in to help train these individuals to try and save their life, because ultimately they end up dying by the time they're 40, simply from this medication that has such a major effect. And so when I got there, they told me they were going to use a ketogenic diet approach, and that you know, metabolic syndrome could be cured by having a ketogenic diet. And I didn't know what that was, and I thought they were crazy, to be honest with you, having the high fat, but it was very, very, very effective for all of these children. They lost weight, the cholesterol went down, the good cholesterol went up, triglycerides went down, waist adiposity went down, their overall sense of well-being and energy went up. The whole thing was extremely successful. I was sold. I did it on myself and haven't turned back since. So,
yeah.
So it really can be used to save lives.
Yeah, multiple applications for
multiple
it, which
applications.
is very
yeah.
interesting. So, I guess that's a good lead into actually how to do or to set up a ketogenic diet. And I think we start from the groundworks. And how do you figure out how many, or the percentage of carbs, fats, proteins, and if you could, you know, maybe talk a little bit about some of the common mistakes you guys come across when people are starting the ketogenic diet, and whether that's, as you mentioned before, too high of protein or not monitoring their carbs close enough. So I guess, yeah, how do you set it up? If I want to start keto tomorrow, what do I need to do?
Well, you know, the most important thing is making sure you understand what the macronutrient ratios are on a true ketogenic diet. Again, it's different than a low carbohydrate diet that a lot of people are familiar with. This is a diet that has about 75% of its calories from fat, about 20% of its calories from protein, and about 5% of its calories from carbohydrate. So basically you have to get an estimate of what your caloric needs are on a daily basis. There are a lot of different formulas to do that. You know, you can go see a dietitian, you can get your metabolic rate checked and all those kinds of things to try to determine what your overall calorie levels are. And then you do a little bit of math and you come out with that using that ratio, and that will give you the grams of fat, carbohydrate, and protein that you need to target each day.
Mm-hmm. And are there any specific sources? Because I know some people think 75% fat.
Yeah.
How can that be good for you?
So the hardest part of this diet when you first start out is just getting over the fat phobia, as I like to call it, because you've been ingrained your entire life with this low fat craze, you know, that fat is what makes you fat. But as we discussed, insulin resistance and carbohydrates are actually what makes you fat. But nonetheless, people are taught to fear fat. You know, they think butter is the devil. Eating fatty meats is also the devil. So the first thing you have to do is get over that fear of eating fat is going to make you fat. So when it comes to having 75% of your calories from fat, these are things coming from, you know, saturated fats, which have actually been proven to give you the most amount of energy. So you have butter, you have coconut oil, eggs. And, you know, you're using oils, olive oil, you know, fatty fish, salmon especially is good for the omegas. I eat nuts and seeds, pumpkin seeds, sunflower seeds. You can use cream cheese, sour cream, regular cheese. It's just training yourself to go after the fat is the hardest part. And, you know, you can only get 20% of your calories from protein. And the other thing people will end up doing is they go to the grocery store and they say, I have to have 75% fat, 20% protein, and they end up selecting ground turkey or turkey bacon. That's a big mistake because you'll quickly find out that your protein numbers are way up there, but your fat is down there. And what ends up happening is your body converts that protein into glucose. It'll keep you out of ketosis and mess with your energy levels. When it comes to the 5% carbohydrates, I think it's important to note that it is net carbohydrates. So you are taking out fiber from that calculation. Green leafy vegetables are huge on this diet. Taking a fiber supplement is also important. You know, when I was low carb for a very, very, very long time, years, I would spend every single day just thinking in my head, I got to avoid carbs, I got to avoid carbs, I got to avoid carbs, and they're everywhere, and it can be mentally exhausting. On the ketogenic diet, you're not eating carbs. You need to be focusing on getting enough fat. You need to wake up every day and you need to say, where's the fat coming from and how can I reach my fat macronutrient goal? Instead of saying, I got to avoid the carbs, because you'll get caught up pretty quick. So.
Yeah, I think one of the points of confusion that a lot of people have on ketogenic diets, and I know, you know, Dr. Jacob Wilson talks a lot about this too, is that a lot of times the confusion about ketogenic diets happens because many people are afraid of high fat, high carbohydrate diets at the same time. And while this amount of fat might seem high, I mean, if you think about it, a person on 2,400 calories a day is eating 200 grams of fat on this diet. But the thing is, that is their primary energy source on this diet. They're not, you know, it's one thing to be eating 300 grams of carbohydrate and 200 grams of fat. That's bad news, but this is a little bit different take on it. And so that's one of the things that people kind of have to understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You had mentioned keto adapted.
Yes.
That's a word we hear, ketosis, and then obviously the ketogenic diet and ketones. A lot of names that sound very, very similar, but they all kind of have their own respective definition. So take me through the process of, if I just started a ketogenic diet today, what can I expect in the next few days, in the next couple weeks, and then when and what does it mean to be keto adapted?
Yeah, I can take you through a little bit of that. You know, the one thing people don't understand is that there's a difference between being in ketosis and being keto adapted. And the difference is that if you go on a very high fat, very low carbohydrate diet for a short period of time, you will end up with ketones in the blood. You'll meet the definition of being in ketosis, but your body hasn't fully adapted to using those ketones for fuel yet. There are enzymes that are present in your brain cells and in your muscle cells and everything, and it takes a while for those enzymes to kick in, and there's adaptations that go on with those enzymes. You actually see the activities of those enzymes that metabolize ketones go up. So while you might get into ketosis after 3-4 days on a high-fat diet like this, you may not be fully keto adapted for weeks or even months. It takes a little while to really truly adapt to this way of eating and this get your body metabolism to change over to using fat for fuel.
Mm-hmm.
And from experience myself and from dealing with a lot of people that I've helped with the ketogenic diet, the first few days, I would say the first 2 weeks, kind of considered hell week. Mm-hmm. You have to face it and you have to understand, you've been running on carbohydrates your entire life. Glucose is your primary source of energy. And when you take that glucose away, your body will fight you back for it. I kind of, carbohydrates hit the same part of your brain as narcotics and other drugs called the reward center. So when all of a sudden you pull that stuff away, your body and your brain is saying, it's give me this stuff back. I kind of liken it to checking yourself into rehab, essentially. And it really does kind of feel like that. Your energy levels for the first few days will go down. But physiologically, what your goal is to burn off the stored carbohydrates in your body. Once that happens, your body will switch over and start burning fat and produce ketones for you. It depends on the individual how quickly they can kind of overcome what's called the keto flu. The dreaded keto flu, it's not the actual flu, you just kind of get certain symptoms that are similar to the flu. So, all of a sudden, you'll kind of come out of that slump and your body is just going to say, fine, okay, we give up, we don't care about the carbs anymore. We're going to start using this fat as energy. And you'll notice immediate benefits from it. And then you're off to the races there. So.
Yeah, there's some changes that go on with fluid balance as well during the first couple weeks of a keto diet, where you have some more losses of fluid and electrolytes than your body is used to on a higher carbohydrate diet. Some people think that might be part of the reason why, other than the low carbohydrate, obviously, and the low glycogen levels in the muscle, which is stored carbohydrate in the muscle. Beyond that, you also can see some problems with electrolyte imbalances and things like that. So, it's been suggested by Dr. Volek and other individuals who do a lot of research on the ketogenic diet. Make sure you're keeping your sodium intake where it needs to be, your potassium intake where it needs to be on this diet, and that might help to ease some of those keto flu type of symptoms.
Yeah, that's very, very, very important.
Yeah.
The sodium is another one of those things, though, where everybody's like, well, if I eat too much sodium, I'm going to get fat, it's going to cause bloating. Not the case on a ketogenic diet. You're suppressing the hormone insulin, and that's allowing you to mobilize fat. But the problem is insulin's also the hormone that tells your kidneys to store sodium. So you must replace that sodium. Your kidneys are just flushing out sodium at rapid amounts, especially when you're working out. So sodium, in my opinion, is absolutely critical. When a client calls up and says, hey, I'm feeling like crap, the very first thing I do is say, how's your sodium intake level? I'll suggest drinking a cup of chicken broth. Make sure you salt your food. Don't be afraid to put salt on your food. Eat salty snacks. The other one is potassium, which is also very, very, very important as well. Things like avocados are perfect for that. And then magnesium is the third essential electrolyte on this diet. Most people, when they fail on a ketogenic diet, when they just say, hey, I'm going to do this, and they haven't done much research, and they'll get the eating part down for the most part, but then the electrolytes is the hidden killer here. When those go down, you start getting the headaches, the dizziness, the lethargy, and you will quit. Mm-hmm. And you didn't even know that all you had to do was add some salt to your food.
Yeah, even using salmon as one of your protein sources during the ketogenic diet. Number one, it's got great healthy fats, and it's a good source of protein. But also, it's a fairly reasonable source of potassium. Putting that with your leafy greens, your avocado, and things like that. That is one way to try to get Potassium. Potassium can be a little difficult to get on this diet because you're not getting a lot of dairy products, you're not drinking orange juice, you're not eating bananas, all the kinds of things, or baked potatoes,
yeah.
a lot of the things that people typically associate with potassium. So, but there are ways to do that, even using some light salt once in a while, which is a
good.
potassium chloride type of product, is a way to get a little bit of extra potassium in there on this diet. So you make sure you don't tank on the electrolytes and the fluids and stuff.
Yeah. And so from starting, feel a little crappy for a few weeks, and then you get into keto
Ketosis.
adaptation, and then become keto adapted, other than just how you feel. I know that there are sticks that you can pee on. There's blood keto. Do you guys recommend doing that? Do you recommend just going off of how you feel, or how do you know or be able to track your progress through the adaptation or getting to the adaptation part of the keto diet?
I use the keto, the urinalysis tests that you can buy at your local grocery store and pharmacy. They are the least accurate of all the ways to measure, but and they can also fluctuate depending on, water intake, timing of the day, things like that. I use them kind of just as a way, if that stick turns any shade of red, I'm good. And I don't obsess over it. I don't do ketone strip tests every single day. I just kind of use it as a guide. It's kind of like it's an assurance thing. It's if that thing turns red, I know I'm doing something right. I don't care how dark it is, how light it is, things like that. But I'll let the doctor explain the other methods that are.
Yeah. There are a couple methods that are out there as well. One of the primary circulating ketone bodies is beta hydroxybutyrate, or BHB. The Abbott company actually has a monitor to measure beta hydroxybutyrate concentration in the blood. So it's a finger stick, just like testing your blood sugar. It's kind of expensive on a per strip basis, especially. It's probably the gold standard as far as monitoring your levels of ketones. Typically on a ketogenic diet, to be considered in ketosis, your blood ketone level or BHB level has to be at least 0.5 millimoles per liter, which is what the machine will tell you how many millimoles per liter you are. 0.5 to around 3 is what we would consider sort of that nutritional ketosis type of range, kind of that target level that you're shooting for. There's also breath monitoring as well that monitors acetone, and that one, they've done some studies showing some correlations with the blood monitoring. So that might be an option as well. I would say still probably the blood monitoring is the gold standard if you're really, really trying to stay in that strict ketosis range.
So during this process, again, going back to starting the diet, maybe experiencing crappy days, how or would you train differently during this time? Did you train any differently, and how did you push through? Because I think that's another reason why people quit this early on. And again, maybe it's because they're not using the correct supplements with it, sodium, potassium, magnesium. Or maybe they're just going in too hard and not realizing that their body might need more time to adapt.
Yeah, I'm trying to think back when I first started this diet. I definitely remember your strength kind of falls off in the very beginning. It's very common. A lot of people they get alarmed by that. They freak out and they think my strength's going to go down. This diet's not for me. That your strength will come back as you become adapted. Your body's going through so many changes in the very beginning of this. So incorporating rest days into your training is something that I feel is very, very, very important. Also, research has shown that things like high intensity interval training, and my personal favorite is Tabata, will get the glycogen down very, very, very fast, which will bring you closer to actually switching over and producing ketones and getting into ketosis. I incorporated a lot of supersets, trisets, and just kind of keep the intensity up. I also make sure that I pair. Before I did this diet, I was the typical bodybuilder, one muscle group at a time, one muscle group a day type of guy. Now I make sure I pair muscle groups together. I've even done some full body workouts, upper body, lower body splits. Really, it's up to you. But the high intensity interval training and the Tabata, in my opinion, is something that's very important in the beginning. And make sure you rest. Your body is going through so much changes. If you don't give yourself enough time to rest, your body's just gonna hate you for it. So that's been my experience with it.
And did you take anything before, during, after your workouts, or did you supplement differently once you started on the keto diet?
So I had to kind of avoid the flavored BCAAs for the first 2 weeks just to make sure that I wasn't sending mixed signals to my brain that, hey, you're going to get a little bit of glucose here and there. You can buy unflavored BCAAs, of course. But creatine, in my opinion, was absolutely critical. The production of ATP, there's so many benefits to creatine, and adding that in was a huge help. The creatine monohydrates. I backed off protein for the first 2 weeks, whey protein supplements, because, like I said before, if you get too much protein, your body will convert it into glucose. But that was kind of the basic supplement that I was taking.
So once you get into, you're now fully, we'll fast forward a few weeks from my start date, and I'm keto adapted, what can I expect to be different? How I feel, how I perform? What were some of the things that you've noticed or maybe that you've heard of that people, when they finally got to be fully keto adapted?
I think the number one thing is the energy levels. The maintaining high energy levels is, from my experience, like I said before I did keto, I was just straight cutting carbs forever, and my energy levels were rock bottom. Then when I did, so glucose, when you have high blood sugar, your energy levels are up, but then when your blood sugar goes down, all of a sudden your energy levels are down. It creates this roller coaster type of energy. With ketosis, your body is able to kind of draw its energy from itself, right? And it no longer has that urge to go out and seek more glucose. So you'll start to notice that you have more steady energy levels throughout the day, which in my opinion is huge. Energy crashes are the worst, and that's the one thing that I was thankful for the ketogenic diet is, all right, I don't have to worry about feeling like crap all day long. Inflammation goes down in the body when you restrict carbohydrates, so you'll feel a bit lighter on your feet, joints, less joint pain if you have joint pain. Mental clarity and alertness is through the roof. I remember right when I first became adapted, I was waking up in the morning and I was just ready to rock and roll. You'll also notice some suppression in appetite. Again, your body's able to kind of use itself and use its own fat stores as energy. So especially in the morning when you wake up, you won't be as hungry as you used to be. So, those are a few of the things. In the gym, I noticed more endurance. I wasn't getting huffy and puffy so quick. I could go forever. And I think that's one of the main reasons why a lot of long distance runners and endurance athletes are using this diet, including some MMA fighters. Most popularly, Joe Rogan uses it as well, but for that endurance factor as well. So,
and I think, kind of tying in with that, there's a lot of research now on not only ketogenic diets, but also training the muscles in a state of low carbohydrate availability. So like hitting muscles repeated times without replacing glycogen. Mm-hmm. And one of the things they're showing in a lot of these models is that does upregulate some of the enzymes associated with fat metabolism in the muscles. So, some athletes might be using this diet on a periodized type of basis where they'll go keto for a while to try to increase some of those fat metabolizing enzymes. They may not necessarily go keto through their whole training structure because for some athletes where they have to have really high power outputs, and have to exercise at a really high percentage of their maximal oxygen consumption, it can be hard to do that with just fat as and ketones as an energy source. Mm-hmm. But if they're also in sports where they're using fat for energy for a period of time during the exercise, so having a period of fat adaptation type of training might be helpful in particular phases of their event to improve their performance as well. I know that's one of the things that athletes are experimenting with a lot.
Mm-hmm. And what about someone who wants to add muscle? Because we hear with the ketogenic diet, sometimes people will use it for weight loss. It's received a lot of attention as a weight loss diet, along with some of the other low carb, high protein diets. But if I wanted to add muscle, would this diet work for that? Or would I have to tweak or change up anything to my diet or training to follow a high fat diet, but still increase muscle protein synthesis and put on mass?
Yeah, I guess my take would be is, there are some studies that Dr. Jacob Wilson's lab has done, that they've done and presented at some meetings showing that it was possible for individuals on a ketogenic diet to actually gain lean body mass and strength. So, you know, I think one of the messages that sort of gets lost in the ketogenic literature is that there's just not that many studies that are out there, and there are very, very few studies on people who are actually doing heavy duty and appropriately designed resistance training at the same time. You know, one of the advantages those studies have is that they were doing, you know, periodized resistance training and a very well-designed weight training program. Now, I wouldn't say that the ketogenic diet is necessarily the optimal diet for building muscle mass. I mean, I think if you're really in a serious, you know, muscle building phase, you know, you may want to have that extra carbohydrate in there to help you out. But I don't think it's necessarily impossible to gain muscle mass, and certainly you can at least maintain your muscle mass on this ketogenic type of diet.
And so, Jason, I'm interested to hear how, because you are a keto athlete, you followed the diet, I believe, for 8.5 months, 9 months,
Yeah,
you've said?
almost a year.
So how have you taken kind of the research side of things and what you've read about, and then tailored it to fit your lifestyle?
Everyday life.
Yeah, I mean, that's what people want to know. It looks
Yeah.
great on paper, it looks great in a controlled research setting, but what happens in real life?
Yeah, so ideally versus reality-wise. You know, like I said before, I've kind of progressed into the keto diet. I started from the very beginning as a wrestler, counting calories and just thinking that was it. Then I went to low carb. From low carb, I kind of found out my energy levels were terrible, so I went to carb cycling. And then from carb cycling through, you know, my opportunity to work with the mentally ill children, I found ketogenic dieting, and it just solved all of my problems. I was just in heaven. But, you know, really, now there are people that will do a strict ketogenic diet, you know, forever. And that's great. But there's also different approaches you can take, like targeted ketogenic diet and cyclical ketogenic dieting. For me, I chose to do a cyclical ketogenic diet, and it's, you know, probably the primary reason why I've been able to stick to this diet for about 8.5 months. You know, carbs are just absolutely everywhere, and avoiding them for 8.5 months is almost an impossible task. Some people can do it. My hat's off to you, but for me, you know, wife wants to go out on the weekend. I've got a birthday party to go to, a wedding, you know. It kind of allows you that social flexibility. So, you know, what I basically did was I took a keto cycle approach, and so I would get myself adapted. I would take myself through the adaptation phase, and then from that point, once I was adapted, I would do a strategic carb day once every weekend. The carb day was very restricted, though. It wasn't just go blow it out. It was 300 to 350 grams of carbohydrates. I would have my cheat meal, of course, but then I would also scale it back and have slower digesting carbohydrates in there as well. The average American gets about 300 to 350 grams of carbs a day anyways, so I felt like that was kind of a good place to be. I was able to get back into ketosis 24 hours after that strategic carb day. And also, I think it's important to note that when you eat those carbohydrates, you know, they're going to refill muscle glycogen. Once the muscle glycogen gets up to the top, then you will start storing fat. So I also kind of took a conservative approach in saying I'm not going to go eat 1,700 grams of carbs. I want to make sure I get the gas tank up there, but I don't want to get too overboard with it. So really that has kind of helped me stick with it. Now, when I work with clients who need to lose significant amounts of weight, I would suggest going what's called the long cycle, where you're going 2 weeks keto with a strategic carb day on the weekend, even less carbs. And then I also work with clients who are over 300 pounds, both men and women. And for them, I keep them in ketosis for much longer periods of time. So 3 weeks in a row keto with the carb day on the weekend. And it's worked out brilliantly. You know, life just happens, and they look, it's like the carrot, you know, in front of you. It's like, hey, let's just go keto for these 3 weeks, you know, and then, you know, you can have your carb day and it's just a cheat day. Everything's great, you know, and you're right back into it. So socially, I feel like it's been a great way to kind of take keto and apply it to every normal day life. And I've gotten amazing results. You know, that's why I'm sitting here right now. First, I did it with myself. Well, first I saw it change the lives of a bunch of kids with mental illness that were literally gonna die. And this diet saved their life. For me, it solved a lot of problems. I'm in the fitness industry. You know, my physique is my business card, and I have to have a diet that I can stick with long term. It has to be a lifestyle for me. And so the ketogenic diet is absolutely been a godsend for me in my career. All of a sudden, I was able to maintain, you know, very low body fat, and continue and maintain muscle with having the added extra energy. And so, you know, that was my biggest thing when I went on this ketogenic diet was I going to lose a bunch of muscle? I knew I was going to lose weight, but was I going to lose a bunch of muscle? I did some research. I found that ketones actually have a protein sparing effect, because when you are in ketosis, your body is relying less on the glucose, so it's not going to try and convert the protein that you have in your body into glucose to stimulate protein synthesis. So I was, you know, my gains were still there. You know, I was, like I said before, my strength went down in the very beginning. I got a little bit alarmed, but that quickly bounced back. I've been able to maintain and build slightly a lot of good muscle. Also, when you know, I feel like the visual appearance of, you know, the muscle definition and things like that is something that I go for. So, so yeah, that's kind of how that happened.
So would you say it's more or less it's helped you maybe train better with more energy versus it's gotten you this body where it's at right now, or just helped to maintain, if that makes sense?
Well, it hasn't really gotten, you know, it takes years and years and years of training to build muscle, you know. This, like I said before, I'm interested in being in shape as best possible. I don't go through big bulking periods and things like that. It took a lot of time to build muscle. This diet has just been the best in terms of increasing my energy, making me feel better, and allowing me to stay shredded without losing weight. I know so many guys that do competitions and they just straight cut the carbs out completely. And you know, it doesn't last for very long. It's very hard to do that. So something like a ketogenic diet approach would actually, in my opinion, be beneficial as well. I feel like I could jump on stage anytime I want throughout the year because I can stay lean and muscular all year round without losing the muscle density. And I'm making gains in the gym. You know, I much more than when I was just running straight low carb. That is for absolute fact. I think 50% of your muscle is made up of fat. You don't need carbs in order to build muscle. Really, you need protein synthesis. And so things like leucine, H&B, things like that, kind of creatine, help that out as well. So.
Yeah, and less miserable.
Yeah, less miserable. I mean, when you looked at me, if I was, you know, a year ago, and I looked the same, if I looked like this, I was miserable. I really was. It's very, very tough to live a low carb life, but when I went to the ketogenic diet, all of a sudden I get to eat all this fat, all this butter and fatty meats, and it was like a dream come true. I thought it was too good to be true in the beginning, to be honest with you. So that's my approach. The keto cycle is, you know, in my opinion, for me, what works for me and my clients the best.
And would you say with the keto cycle that it's important to get keto adapted first?
Yes. Taking yourself through the keto adaptation phase is part of the program, absolutely.
And because I've heard and I've read, and maybe you can talk a little bit about why this wouldn't work, is from the get-go doing during the week your keto or your high fat, and then during the weekend you're high carb, or you're just not really paying attention. So how will that affect? I mean, will you just never? Does it just drop your ketones back again? You'll never get to the keto adaptation process, or it's just harder to, like, if you're only doing keto 5 days a week, and typical carb diet the other 2 days, not being in a keto adapted state, how might that affect the whole process? Will you still get the benefits of ketones, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so like I said before, I take myself and make sure I get keto adapted first before I start introducing my strategic carb day. And like I said before, it's 1 day. For me, I've been able to get back into ketosis 24 hours afterwards. You know, the majority of my clients have as well. So I don't really know.
As long as you get to, would you say it's just most important to get to keto adapted first before you introduce any carbs or a higher
Correct.
carb diet. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. And you brought up a good point of you're not going to stick with it if it's not something that fits with your lifestyle.
Yeah.
And we will always, it's always said ketogenic diet. And I think a lot of people think diet as it's a weight loss or it's something, but it's a lifestyle for people. And if you're not okay with eating 75% of your calories from fat, if you're not okay with saying goodbye to carbohydrates, this just may not be the lifestyle for you, but figuring out a way to make it work.
Make it work for you in a real world setting. And because the most important part of any diet is adherence. That's the most important thing. That's going to tell whether a diet is good or not, is how long can somebody stick with it and can they get results. So that's essentially what I've done, is I've just kind of custom tailored it to meet my needs.
To his point, that's exactly right. When you look at the studies on the different weight loss diets that are out there, different macro ratios and stuff like that, they compare the Ornish diet, the Weight Watchers diet, the Atkins diet. The bottom line is the one that you can stay on is the right one.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep. Preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
It really is.
So kind of on that line, any tips to help you if the ketogenic lifestyle is one that you're wanting? Any tips? I mean, you're traveling right now.
Yes.
Your wife just had a baby. You were telling us you're at the hospital for 3 days.
Yeah, which is another reason why the keto cycle saved my day.
Pretty sure that they don't support or have higher fat foods like that. So how do you integrate, or any tips that you can give us on staying on track or monitoring your diet to allow for travel emergencies?
I've kind of built in the travel emergency event social week with the keto cycle, and so I do kind of get that part out of the way. When those tough situations come up on the weekend, I'll just say, okay, well, I have something coming up on Saturday where I know I'm going to be surrounded by tons of carbs and I don't want to be the outcast, so I'll make that my carb day. I just think getting over the fat makes you fat thing, and being able to, like, for example, I make keto coffee, and that's 1 tablespoon of coconut oil and 1 tablespoon of butter. And to be able to actually put butter in your coffee and drink it and not feel like you're doing something crazy is a big hurdle. So really, just don't be afraid of fat. Fat does not make you fat. That's kind of my biggest thing. And then track your macros. Keep doing all the research you possibly can, and you'll be good.
And Steve, I'm interested, kind of an insider perspective. We talk about that there's not a lot of research in this category or with this diet. Do you see this going in any specific way, or is it more or less just trying to, again, get more studies looking at long-term effects of this diet? Is there a push to study it in certain populations or making slight alterations to it? Or what can we expect with some of the upcoming research in this field?
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Jeff Volek at Ohio State is one of the most active researchers in the world in this area, and he's very interested in the potential effects that this diet can have on insulin sensitivity and a lot of the variables associated with metabolic syndrome. So I think you'll continue to see that field grow. There's also been a lot of research in the exercise phys world, looking not only at ketogenic diets, but also looking at, again, states of training with low carbohydrate availability. And there may be some benefits during certain types of exercise or different training routines. They've studied the ketogenic diet, for instance, in artistic gymnasts, for instance, and find that their strength doesn't go down in that, and it helps them maintain their body weight that they need to be competitive. So I think as a dietitian, you're looking at trying to have a toolbox of approaches that might be appropriate for individuals that have a specific sport, a specific goal, a specific metabolic profile. One of the things I want to do as a dietitian is, I want to make sure I have tools in my toolbox for all those different kinds of individuals. There may be some people who really, really need the high carb. Okay, we'll do that. Mm-hmm. But then there's some individuals I might look at this individual and they come up to me and they think they're supposed to be on a really high carb diet and they already have a really high triglycerides. And I'd be like, wow, I don't think I want to go quite as high a carbohydrate for this individual. I want to get information. And I think more than anything, from the research and applied perspective, we're starting to recognize now that you can't just have a one-size-fits-all sports nutrition recommendation. You have to take into account the entire person, their health profiles, their sports goals, whatever they may be, and you could have very different diet recommendations for these athletes, instead of just saying, pushing everybody has to have 60% of their calories from carbohydrate, which is frankly what we did in the 80s and 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, very standardized.
We went low fat for 30 years, and there's record numbers of Americans who are obese, and there's a record number of people who are suffering from diabetes, and children especially. So,
and what I'm hopeful for too is more studies, especially with the ketogenic diet, in association with exercise. Because if you look at the vast majority of studies that have been done in the obese population and the metabolic syndrome population, you don't have exercise as part of that equation. Mm-hmm. And you really, to have the best, we know we need people to exercise. So to really have the best scientific studies that give us the most applicable results to our population, we got to have people, doing both the diet and exercise pieces of things, or you're not going to really get, the best research that you can apply to the population. And I know everybody says, well, I want to be able to achieve my results without exercise. And my answer to that is, it ain't going to happen. If you really are committed to making change, you're gonna need to exercise. You can't just follow a diet and say, okay, that's all there is. Mm-hmm. The exercise piece is critical, and you need to figure out how to hit that part of it.
Yeah, and you bring up such great points that this is very much in its infancy. There's still so much research that needs to be put into it. And I don't want to say it's a complaint, but my biggest question I always bring up with the ketogenic diet is, well, what about a highly active individual? And we have, N of one, one subject, and we can kind of say, okay, this is how it worked for one person, but to see in a larger group and see how the body reacts to it, and if it can maintain a lifestyle that's heavily anaerobic or involves short bursts of activity, and our body is so used to, and we've learned from introductory to XPhys 101 that your body used carbs for all of that. Well, what happens when you take it all out? And I look forward to seeing some of the research, hopefully, that can be done on that, so we have a better understanding and how to incorporate it into different athletes' lifestyles.
I think you're going to see big things coming for the ketogenic diet.
Yeah. It's definitely a very interesting. I know a lot of our viewers love it.
Yeah, it goes against the grain. It's complete opposite from everything you've learned and grew up with. But there's a lot of validity to it, a lot of success stories. Now, if we could just get the funding for the studies, that'd be amazing. Yeah, funding, always the biggest.
That's the rule as far as sports nutrition, exercise physiology research in general.
Yeah.
It's just for an approach that is the number one approach for helping people improve their lives and their health, you would think there would be more devotion of NIH resources and all those types of things to studying, this field in particular, thinking about how much it could potentially affect healthcare expenditures and everything in this country. It's just, sometimes it's mind-boggling to think about how low the funding is for research like this relative to other approaches that don't carry nearly the potential for success in helping people change their lives and improve their health.
Yeah. Well, hopefully one day we will be in that right direction to go forward. So one thing that I do want to get from each of you is maybe your number one tip that you would have, and maybe it's not a tip, maybe you hear the same kind of misunderstanding or error associated with the ketogenic diet. So either or a tip or your number one mistake that you hear, and then how you would correct that to someone who is looking to go keto. Whether that be a supplement, whether that be, this is my favorite type of fat, or this is how I start my day because I think it sets me up.
Coconut oil and butter.
Coconut oil and butter.
No, I think a lot of people are afraid of losing gains on the ketogenic diet, and that's one of the reasons why I've loved it. Ketones have a protein-sparing effect, and like I've said before, I just went low carb for a long period of time, and I lost all my muscle gains completely. With a ketogenic diet, I've been able to maintain and actually build lean muscle. And so I feel like a lot of people kind of shy away from it because they don't want to lose muscle mass. My other biggest tip is you gotta focus on the electrolytes. Electrolytes are absolutely critical on this diet. Do not fear fat. Fat will not make you fat. If you don't get enough fat on this diet, your energy levels will simply be sapped and you will end up quitting. And just kind of have confidence with it. It's scary when you go into it. I'm telling you, I've been there before. You're like 200 grams of fat. It plays games with your head. It goes against everything you've ever known and learned and believed before. But if you can just kind of say, especially if you're somebody that has to lose a lot of weight and you've tried everything out there, you just got to say, okay, I'm going to take the plunge. I'm going to do this. I'm going to give it a shot. So just give it a shot. Don't be scared off just because, we're telling you to eat a bunch of fat when you grew up thinking fat made you fat.
Anything?
Yeah, I think for me, it's kind of a educate yourself, plan, and monitor. Those three words are the words that I would keep in your mind. If you're, this is a very significant departure from the typical diet, and I've done a contest diet for bodybuilding before, and I know that when I had to do that diet, it wasn't necessarily a ketogenic diet, but it was a lot different diet than I was eating. I dropped 50 pounds on this diet, to get into contest shape. And it's all about educating yourself and planning and monitoring yourself as you go along. And that's the same thing with keto. You need to really understand, okay, what is a ketogenic diet at its core? What am I going to be eating? How can I keep track of my carbohydrates? How can I, get those systems in place? So you've educated yourself on it. Make yourself a plan for those kinds of foods that you can use. Shoot, there's a lot of really good cookbooks out there. I just got a ketogenic diet cookbook that has some amazing recipes in there, like using cauliflower as a substitute for rice
and fat bombs.
And I was just like, how do you do that? I wouldn't have even thought about that in my traditional thinking about a diet as a dietitian. There are a lot of creative ways that you can incorporate this, so that you can still maintain a ketosis state, but have some interesting foods. You can incorporate those part of your plan, and then monitoring. There's no better resource than monitoring yourself and seeing how you're doing, and making sure that you've got you're monitoring your medical status, and you're monitoring your body composition and your energy levels and all those things that are important for athletes that are training and trying to get the best results possible.
Yeah, those are all great resources. And thank you so much for being here. I truly enjoyed spending my day with you and learning pretty much everything there is to know about the ketogenic diet.